I hope everybody had a great Memorial Day. I know I did. I hope everybody else did also. For an overview of what we're going to be talking about today, you've got an agenda before you. If we get through all these items that are on the agenda, we also will be hopefully moving ahead and talking about some traffic and the data that's being updated for that. It is, but if not, we've got a pretty full agenda. I would also let you know that there are minutes in front of everyone. Everybody's got a set of those minutes. I don't know if people have had a chance to review those. We're going to need to, at a certain point in time, vote and approve the minutes from our group. And be interested to know if people have had a chance to review those minutes. They're prepared? Okay, great. We'll deal with that in just a minute. From a housekeeping perspective, if you can pass make sure that the mics are passed around. We don't have one for everybody, but because we're being recorded, it would just be helpful to make sure that everybody can hear. Let's see, before we get into the approval of the minutes, last month at our last meeting, the question, one of the questions that was raised in the letter that Diane and Lee and Richard sent out was the question of disclosure, and I'd be interested to get anybody's thoughts on that. I think the question is really one of making all of us aware of potential conflicts or things that, like for example, I live within a quarter of a mile of the route. I own property within a quarter of a mile of the route. So different things like that. My thought would be we would try to find something for disclosure that we could let everybody know, that we would fill out and just have. It's not a question of input, but I think it's a question of making sure that everybody knows where everybody's coming from. Any questions about that? I will get something out well in advance of our next meeting. The other comment that I wanted to make is that we're trying to make sure that we get information that we're going to be talking about at each of these meetings to folks a week in advance. That way people have a chance to read, review, study, so that things that we're going to be considering, you'll have a chance to prepare questions, all those sort of things. So the real intent is to get that out to you ahead of time, and I want to thank Mark and Steve and Courtney for getting all that out to everybody in advance. Any questions about that? Yes, Laura.
Is there a way we can see it clearer someplace, more detailed when it comes out? It didn't really come up for me. Any specific on the streets and sidewalks and all that?
I mean, we can provide the plans we have available.
Even if we could swing by someplace and look at it?
You could swing by our office.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions about that? If not, then the first order of business, I guess the formal order of business for us today would be the approval of the minutes. I know that there has been one submitted change. Are there any other changes, additions, or deletions to the minutes?
Am I addressing this to you?
Far away.
I wonder if we're going to try to keep any kind of a record at all, I'd like to ask that the document that led to the answer of a lot of the questions from you that was at everybody's place, that be attached to the minutes.
Okay.
And I have a clean copy to have Courtney attach that.
I think that's fine. Any other? Yes, ma'am.
One of the mayor's comment, mayor says our goal going forward, it says transit system that works. But mayor said the goal is twofold. Transit system that works and least disrupted for the neighborhood and business. I think those twofold is very important, so I just want to make note.
Where is that?
It's page 2, about halfway down. Start with our goal going forward.
And what's the change that you would like to make?
It's the goal going forward is twofold: a transit system that works and least disruptive.
Any comments on that from anybody?
Is that what he said?
Yes.
Did he say that?
Yeah, that's the question. I don't remember.
Why don't we just take a look? Can we do that?
We ought to
Let's go back and
to
take
the
a look.
recording and see if that's what he said. If that's what he said, it's fine.
Yeah. What we'll do is go back, take a look at that, and send that back out to everybody.
That'd be great.
Any other questions or comments on the minutes? We'll get those back out to everybody. Any other introductory questions that anybody's got about where we are or what we're going to try to get done today? If not, Mark, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. I'm going to give you a summary and an overview of the Small Starts program. This is the program that the AMP's part of at FTA. FTA, of course, is part of DOT in Washington. And this is a discretionary program supporting what they call locally planned, implemented, and operating guideway capital investments. That's the overview, the broad definition. It's for heavy and light rail, commuter rail, or BRT projects. These projects are less than $250 million, and they require less than $75 million from FTA. Projects that are bigger than that are what are in a program called New Starts. Projects that are smaller than that are in a program called Very Small Starts. I don't know what is below Very Small Starts. I guess very, very small starts. So at some point it becomes humiliating. So the process that we went through for Small Starts, and understand that all the things that we've done on the AMP so far is following a process that was laid out by FTA. So the first step is the alternatives analysis, and in that step you determine the mode, and for our project the mode that was selected was BRT. The next step is what's called preliminary engineering, and you often hear us talk about the 30% design. That's what that preliminary engineering step is. And in that step, what you determine is the route for the BRT. You locate the station, the stations, and then of course you design to that 30%, which is nothing really more than a conceptual or a schematic design. And then this design provides enough information that you can begin what's called the NEPA process, which is the environmental review that must be done on every federal project. NEPA stands for the National Environmental Policy Act. Once that step is finished, then you make a request, the city makes a request to FTA to be admitted into what's called project development. And that's the step that we're in right now. We were admitted into project development in August. We got the notification from FTA, And at that point, then, the project goes into final design. You get your local financial commitment. You finish the NEPA process, the environmental review process, and ultimately what you work towards is what's called a finding of no significant impact by the federal government, or the acronym is FONSI, which we're still working on. And then you submit your small starts application. And again, these are all the things that we've been following. You know, this is not, the process that we've followed and the steps that we've followed is not something that the city or MTA came up with. This is the steps of the Small Starts program. So in Small Starts, an FTA calls it a submittal. We always refer to it as an application, but they corrected us and said it's not an application, it's a submittal, and they were pretty adamant about that. But there are two broad categories in the submittal. And in the Small Starts submittal or application, you must achieve a medium ranking overall to be included for funding. And so there are two broad categories to that. The first is what's called the local financial commitment, and that accounts for 50% of the application. And under that part of the submittal, there is what's called a streamlined assessment test. And if you can meet that test, then you receive a medium rating, and you don't have to go through a much longer process. There's 3 steps to the streamlined assessment that you have to meet, three tests. You have to have a reasonable plan to secure state and local funding. You have to, the additional operation and management costs of the project has to be less than 5% of the annual budget for MTA. And then the agency, MTA, is in reasonably good financial condition based on 3 years of audited financials. So we applied for that, and we met that test. And then so for that part of the submittal, we received a medium rating. And then the next part is what's called, the other 50% is what's called project justification. And in project justification, there's 6 criteria. Each of these are equally weighted, and again, you have to receive a medium rating together on all 6 of these to be recommended for funding. So those 6 criteria are, the first one is mobility, which is essentially ridership. The second is what's called cost effectiveness, and that is the capital cost divided by ridership, and there's a level that FTA wants to see that you can meet. The third is congestion relief, and when you fill out one of these proposals, you follow what's called the guidance from FTA, which is essentially the instructions on how to do it. The guidance for this program didn't come out till about 28 days before it was due last summer. And at the time that it came out, there was no guidance on congestion relief. And so they just rated all the projects that submitted as medium. So we kind of got a pass on that one, along with everyone else, all the other cities. The fourth category is what's called land use. This was a new one for FTA this year, and it looks at existing conditions, including affordable housing within a half a mile of the route. The fifth was economic development, and that looks at plans and policies to enhance transit supportive development. And then the last criteria, the last of the 6, is environmental benefits, which is the impact on pollutants and safety in the city. So we submitted our proposal, our submittal, on August the 30th of last year, and then in March we were notified by FTA that we received a medium-high rating, and we were one of 3 that received that higher rating. And so following that, then we were recommended for funding by FTA in the President's budget. So that's kind of the steps that we went through. Now, after the mayor announced the changes that he wanted to make, one of the things that he said was that we had to maintain our rating, our medium-high rating, or at least medium. So if you go back and look at those 6 criteria, because of course the financial test doesn't change, but if you go back and look at those 6 criteria, we were, on congestion relief, we ranked medium just because they didn't have the guidance out. On land use, we were medium-high. Environmental, I believe we were low, which is kind of odd. But if you look at the FTA guidance, what they're really looking for is a before and after equation. And so cities that have really poor air quality do better in this category, and we do less well. And that's just kind of the way FTA sets it up. On cost effectiveness, we were a medium, and on mobility, we were low. We would have to get up. You have to understand that we're competing with cities that have a strong transit history and culture, and so we would have to get up over 2.5 million riders a year to get to the next level. So we think we would probably always be low on that one. And then on economic development, we rank, I think, medium or medium high. So that's kind of an overview. I don't think the changes that we're making are really going to affect our rating that much, because the things that we were low on were still low, medium and high, et cetera. So if you have any questions, I'm glad to try to answer them. David.
Mark, you mentioned that the mode that was selected was BRT. Were there any other modes that would qualify for the Small Starts program that were lower cost than the BRT option?
Well, let me qualify what I say by saying I wasn't involved in the alternatives analysis, but if your question is were there modes that were cheaper, I think the answer is no. That the BRT was the lowest cost.
In comparing different other cities with their small projects that they're working on, some choose to have a designated lane and some don't. And how did we get to the point where we were, that to have it be in traffic as opposed to separate was part of it?
Well,
or maybe that's going back too far.
It was, for me. And I started working on the project late last summer, and there might be somebody else here that can answer that better. I wasn't involved in that decision or went through that process, but I mean, is there anybody can help with that? I mean, how does that typically get done? You weren't here either.
Yeah. Again, as with Mark, we began the project in November, but what I can say it's an operational question of speed and comparing the different options moving forward with the operational piece of the BRT system. So that's what I can relate, is that the center running is definitely faster because you're not competing against left turns or right turns or people in the lane. So there's a piece of quickness that would go to the center lanes versus curb running, whether it's curb running dedicated or curb running mixed flow. So it's an operational question. So it's definitely speed is what's driven the choice. Having said that, though, you can mix and match. Many systems are mixed and matched throughout the corridor. The Health Line is, I think Eugene is, so it's a matter of trying to make it fit for the community and the system that's being designed. I hope that helps.
Ask Mark a question. How many times will this project get rated?
It's a good question. I left that out. When we got our initial rating, there's a lot of things we haven't finished yet. And so when we finish final design, the NEPA, and all the other things that we do, we get re-rated. And so that re-rating will have to include the changes that the mayor suggested, and then any other thing that we do within the design or within the project, those all have to be re-looked at. So essentially, we have to do a new submittal, and that'll be done, I guess, probably towards the end of the year. So that would be one, and then if there were any changes after that, we would always have to resubmit anytime we make a change.
Just on, going back to Laura's question for just a minute, this isn't official, but I sat in on a lot of the early public meetings on the design concept. And the only other point I would add was they did mention several times the sense of permanence that a dedicated lane, that for, attracting economic development and investment, that a dedicated lane had a much more sense of permanence than just in traffic.
But they didn't mention whether it was dedicated, center line or dedicated curve.
No, not at that point, yeah.
Just a little bit more. I think the idea is to try to attract ridership and to get speed. I mean, as you said, speed is pretty critical because there's no reason to ride it if it's not going to be quicker for a lot of people. And so I think the center lanes was in the previous engineers and consultants' mind was the most effective way to create that speed.
And Louis, that speed issue has always been somewhat confusing to me, and that's why so often you'll hear me ask questions about the system or the method of analysis, because for the rider, typically speed in their minds is destination to destination, which is what makes the location of the stations, the distance, how far away people have to park, the kinds of issues that I think we're going to begin seeing more and more revealed become the issue. It's not whether once you get on the bus or the trolley or whatever, you spend 2 or 3 less minutes. It's destination to destination. So I hope the systems analysis that you'll use when you go through the design will answer some of that for us.
Yeah, I think that's right. For any of us who fly these days, we know that the longest part is not while you're in the air. So, yeah.
I was just going to say, and also how far you have to walk from when you get off the bus to wherever you're going, when another bus may put you closer to your destination, but that bus is slower, so it can be a trade-off.
And then there's the issue of fixed stations. Looking 10 or 20 years ahead, when the demographics of the areas we're thinking about change, you're stuck with those fixed stations. With a dedicated lane, you can adjust those stops in frequency and location based on the ridership.
Just to continue, not necessarily. I mean, you can move those stations. One of the advantages, I think, of bus over rail, although frankly I like rail, but bus over rail is that it's much easier to move the stations.
And cheaper.
So cheaper than rail, sure. Not as cheap as no stations at all, but still cheaper than rail.
But as cheap as curbside?
No, probably not.
Any other questions for Mark?
I had one. Mark, you kind of touched on this when you were going through the requirements, just in regards to state and local funding. I was just wondering if you could expand on something that I believe I read in the Business Journal a couple of months back. Is it true that the federal funding is not guaranteed unless the state and local funding is a done deal? Is that true?
In simple terms, yes. I mean, the proposal that we made included the federal funds, state and local. So, yeah, we have to secure all 3.
Well, just to amend that, I think it's local as defined as maybe state and local. It doesn't have to be state per se.
That's
right. I mean, so the feds just want it matched. They kind of don't worry quite so much about which entity is the matcher. That's right, matching.
Yes, my question is NEPA. You said we are currently conducting an environmental study.
That's right.
Could you tell me a little more detail how exactly it works and what's involved?
Okay. On a NEPA project, and this is true for any federal project, they have a broad range of environmental topics and factors that you have to look at. And it really runs the gamut. It includes things like historic structures, it includes archaeology, it includes air quality, sound quality, noise. It includes construction method, it includes endangered species, water quality, just about any kind of cultural or environmental topic you can think of, you talk about in NEPA. And what you're trying to do in that document, like on historic structures, for instance, what we're trying to show in the document is that the project won't have a negative impact on historic structures. And so for that section, if we can demonstrate that to the federal government, then they sign off on that. And so essentially what we do is there's a section or a chapter for each one of those topics, and then we have consultants that are specialized in that topic, and they write a summary or a report for each topic, and we submit it then to the federal agency, which in this case would be FTA. Once we get that document done, it's called a draft. Then there's a public comment period that's required by the federal government. That's usually for at least 30 days. And then people can see the document and make comments. And so they can agree with us or disagree on that conclusion, let's say again on the historic structures, that, or make their comment. Those are submitted to the federal agency, and then they submit that back to the project, and we have to respond. So if you say, if your comment is that I think this project has a negative impact on the Ryman Auditorium, then we would have to respond to that. And then when that process is all finished, then you get that finding that FTA comes up with.
What's the timeline for the finishing the report?
Right now, it's probably about the end of the year. One of the other components of NEPA is public involvement. And so this meeting here will be included, this process, the CAC, will be included in the NEPA document. So we actually won't finish it until we finish this committee, because we'll want to include that.
On environmental evaluations and studies, would that also include emissions, which if 2,000 people, say, ride the AMP each day, and maybe they get there, 3, 4, 5 minutes more quickly, do you also give weight to if it impedes traffic and cars are taking longer to get to their destination and therefore emitting more emissions, and there are, say, 45,000 cars a day that travel more slowly and emit more, do you offset though? I mean, do you?
Yes. I mean, the simple answer is you take all of that into account. And there is a section in NEPA for air quality where that's talked about, without going into the kind of gritty details of it. And I don't have all of that handy. But there is a section in the report on air quality.
And kind of related to that, Lewis mentioned the speed of getting to your destination, which encourages ridership. In evaluating the whole project, do you also consider if it slows up traditional traffic? How do you weigh the benefit and disruption, as Mina mentioned that the mayor's comment about disruption? How do you weigh that?
Well, I mean, what we do is we have a section on air quality, and we ask our team to write that section of the report. And again, I don't have it handy. I can't go into details of the engineering of it or how it's set up, but you take into account all of the things that you're talking about, including the external factors as well, just things like increased traffic, just from the city growing. And then we write that section in NEPA. We submit that to FTA, and FTA, before they release that draft document to the public, they have to agree with our findings, that it's ready to be released. So if they don't like the way that we've done it, or if they don't like our methodology or the factors that we use, they'll hand it back to us and say, we'd like you to do the following to make this make more sense. And that's the give and take that we go through with FTA before they're satisfied that it's ready to be released. That's the process we're going through right now.
The follow-up was not directed necessarily to the air quality.
Right.
It was trying to weigh the time savings for those who ride the AMP
that's in there
versus the time cost for the 40,000 people that ride cars.
Well, there is also a section in NEPA on traffic and congestion too.
Okay.
So, Lee, I think it actually was more complicated than that, which makes it tougher, which is it's what traffic is now and it's what traffic will be in the future. And I frankly think the first round of consultants probably needed to be reviewed in terms of which is what's going on now, in terms of what they thought. Because I think they were looking at the bus ridership is one factor, the amount of cars on the road now is another, the amount of cars that are going to be on the road is another, and how the buses affect those cars. And I'm not sure that was the best analysis, which is frankly why Mark says it was 30% done, not 100% done. And so I mean, I'm at MTA. I think from my perspective, I'm glad we're doing this.
Yeah, and we're just now at the point, and Jeff's here today, but we're just now at the point where we're starting to finish up a whole new round of traffic numbers. We might get into that today, too. So, and that'll be reflected in NEPA as well.
Mark, is there any formal way by which the FTA rates this project as the beginning of a regional system or regional network?
I don't know the answer to that, Ralph.
So it's not, you don't see that in the documents that you've examined so far? No, I haven't. It wasn't really part of the small start submittal. I think FTA is interested in cities that are trying to do that, and they know just through the meetings and the interaction that we've had with them that, Nashville wants long-term to have a modern transportation system, but I don't know that it's formalized in that document, if that's your question. Yeah.
I don't know if this question is appropriate for Mark or for Steve, but a moment ago, you used the term the mayor's changes, and I guess what I'd like to know is, are these changes that are still under consideration, or these mayor's changes now forming the fundamentals of the plan that we are going to review?
Let me try that one. I think they're the plan, subject to we have to make sure they work. But if they work, then that's what we're going to do. That's our intent. We're open to any kind of discussion about it. We're always looking for a better idea, but I think that's the plan.
Okay. So the comments about the changes at I-440 bridges and then 12th Street, those are part of the plan? Or?
Are you talking about the changes the mayor made? Yeah, that's what we're working on. That's what we're trying to design right now.
Can I ask another question? I don't mean to use your time, but these 6 components of approval have multifaceted assets using your historic property thing. If you decide to park cars as a park and ride entity at West End Middle School, you're thinking about traffic congestion there, you're thinking about the land use, you're thinking about environmental benefits. If you're trying to get your final proposal finished by year end, doesn't it make a little bit of sense to kind of have several meetings with neighbors and entities that would be affected instead of completing a recommendation and then putting it out there for their opinion?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And, you know, we're going through a series of public meetings, and when Steve talks here in a little bit, you'll see how in East Nashville we had a particular problem, and we called together a group of neighbors and property owners and had a series of meetings to try to come up with a solution, which we did. So I think we're doing that.
When you said you called together a group of people, it wasn't an open meeting, they were kind of selected people you wanted to come to the meeting, or
Well,
was this open to the general public?
Well, it was open to the general public. It wasn't widely publicized, but just to kind of tell you what it was, we had at the first public meeting we had, which was at the community center in East Nashville, we got lots of comments about the turnaround at East High and the library. That comment came up a lot. And so we contacted the people that made the comment, and the property owners around there, and some of the business people, and then just some other interested people like Carol Williams and some others in East Nashville. And we formed a small group, and we just worked on that problem for 3 meetings, and we reached a consensus on how it ought to work. I'm kind of stealing his presentation here, but that's what we're ended up doing. And we've done that on some other places on the route too. And we'll continue to do that. That's a pretty productive way to work on small issues. Not, you know, we chose that group because those were the people that seemed to be interested in it. And, you know, somebody at Murphy Road probably isn't interested in it. Well, you might be, but.
I think this conversation that we're having is really productive, but in the interest of time, if there are any questions, if not, I'd love to move on down the agenda and get Bob to give us an update on the community meetings. That was helpful.
Just want to give you a quick update on our meetings last week. Last week we scheduled 2 public meetings on May 21st and May 22nd. Both those were held at Music City Center, and both of them were from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. We had information that was generated by MTA to get public notice out to those meetings and to invite all the public who wanted to attend. And at that meeting, primarily the purpose of those meetings was to provide an update of the project, and when our last round of meetings that we had in January and February of the public meetings, we had indicated that we wanted to, you know, come back and give the public updates as we went along in the final design process. So we felt like it was important to come back and to do that again. So at that meeting, primarily Steve Goodrow, who's the project manager, and Jeff Hammond presented basically kind of a project update where we were in terms of design and kind of summarizing the questions that had been asked at the previous meetings, and also to kind of update the public on traffic, and also to kind of identify what the next steps were in the design process. So with that, part of what we did, the first meeting we actually had it live streamed on Metro 3, and if any of y'all didn't get to attend or didn't get to see that live stream, you can go to Metro 3 website now and actually view that first public meeting. The total participants in the public meeting over the 2 nights, including those who actually joined us through live streaming, were about 200 people. During that session, we had about 52 comment cards that were turned in, or online questions that were asked. And at that meeting also, Steve and Jeff both addressed questions from the public through our moderator at that point. What we'll be doing now, which is typical of our process, we will be taking, as the final design team, and taking those 52 comment cards and those questions, and we pretty much put those into a database so that we can identify who asked them. We also try to categorize those questions in terms of what we're seeing from the public and the level of their interest. And then the design team will get together and try to come up with answers to those questions by overall category. And normally takes us a couple of weeks after the public meetings to basically compile that information and get it ready for distribution. So we're right now in the process of doing that. And again, before our next meeting with this group, we should have that information back and disseminated back out. We also, MTA tries then to also send out and actually each person who did ask a question specifically touch them individually to get their question answered. We also advised at the public meetings that we would expect another round of public meetings this fall, probably timed with whenever we get ready to, when FTA approves the EA for, as Mark mentioned, to get that out for comment. But sometime this fall, we'll be going back out with another round of public meetings. With that, that's kind of an overview. Again, we'll be getting you information as we get everything compiled on the questions. But if you have any general questions about those two meetings, be happy to address those.
And before y'all have those questions, we're going to get the PowerPoint slides that Steve presented to you, I think, today or tomorrow, so that you'll have copies of those also, be able to review those. Any questions for Bob? If not, Steve, you're up.
Great, thank you. This next couple slides here that we have, this is, it looks like a presentation, but think of it more as a guide to our discussion. We're going to present some information on some of the design components we've been working on, and of course, let's just ask questions as we move along through through some of these slides. So with that, the design topics for this afternoon include East Nashville and just an overview of the design itself so far, and then what's transpired on 5 Points. And then we're going to just touch on some ADA compliance kinds of things and station locations, and then we're also going to just touch on just safety of these mid-block stations that we have in the design at this point. Just as an overview, East Nashville has 3 center stations. They're located at these locations. And then there's a pair of curbside stations closer to 5 Points. The project in this piece of the stretch of the project includes about 1.4 miles of center dedicated running and about a quarter mile of mixed curb running. There's 2 park and rides, one at the high school and one at the LP field. And as you all know, we've got a 30% design that we had received to begin working on. And one of our initial discussions was with TDOT to just review the lane widths that were proposed and what their preferred lane widths were and what the minimums that we could be allowed to use. And this slide demonstrates what those are. So what we've done is we've revisited some of the design to account for these lane widths that TDOT would want to see. And just by way of review, we're looking at a 12-foot preferred station width, a 12-foot preferred bus lane, although we could go down to 11 feet if necessary, depending on restrictions that may be along the way. And the same for the auto lane, 11-foot preferred for the through lane, and 10-foot minimum. What makes this a little different is there's no curbs on either side, okay? And then the curb lane, 12-foot is preferred, and then 11-foot minimum is what would be the minimum that we would need. And then for sidewalks, again, 8-foot is preferred. That includes like a 3-foot utility strip or landscape area, and then a 5-foot walkway. So these are kind of the geometric criteria we have moving ahead as far as just right-of-way and width goes. And so we used those, and then we went back and revisited the East Nashville piece to see if this criteria fits the design, and we've made some updates. And let me just break this off a minute and take a look at some of those updates. What I'm going to do now is just kind of slide through just some of the design work that we've done and where it stands at this point. Again, what we've done is we've taken the 30% design and revised the geometry to meet TDOT's lane width criteria. So if we begin, yes.
About the lane widths, is that, were they specifically looking at this corridor? Because I know there's some general standards that they have, or are they, using context to where they were really looking at this corridor?
Well, okay, they have general criteria, okay, and that's the preferred. They will allow that to be reduced, but we will have to go through, for the minimum criteria, we're going to have to go through what they call a design exception process. So we can use smaller lanes if we can show that there's a restriction in the area.
Well, sometimes I've seen, I've seen some data that suggests that narrow lanes are actually safer, particularly for crossing and things like that, and it's always best to look at it within its context.
Right.
And I know you all are doing that, but I just wanted, for the benefit of the committee, realize that, that it's very specific, and that this general rule, while we know, if you painted every street like that, it would not work, that you'd need to really look at it within its context.
Right.
Okay.
I just want to just back that up with the idea that TDOT has its design standards for safety of roadways, and they would want to meet that wherever they can. And so we would go through the process and say, well, look, here's some restricted areas, and because it's restricted, we could take it down to some narrower lanes. And it's usually the restrictions based on things like buildings. We're not going to take any buildings, so we need to look at a geometry that would allow us to get the appropriate lanes through there without impacting those. And that would be something that we could ask a design exception for. Okay, any other questions?
Little silly question about the lane width.
Uh-huh.
When you measure lane width, do you measure inside of the line to line, or outside of the line to line, or middle? Because I think the line itself has
it's like 6
5 inches,
right.
so
It's generally to the center of the line.
center.
Yeah. Now, if we, when we get into looking at, say, rumble strips or something like that at the bus lane, then maybe we'll, have to consider that. And there's like a little median in there, a 1-foot median. So those we may talk a little bit more about as the design advances.
Yeah, our goal is to meet TDOT's spec.
Okay.
We're trying to go with the lanes that they're asking us for.
Other questions? Okay. So with that, what we've done is we've gone back through and just took a look at updating the 30% design to meet some of these criteria. Beginning here at First Street, you can see we've got to the west, it's mixed flow, and the buses would go into a bus lane as they approach the intersection. Again, this would be properly signed and striped so that it would be clear that, a bus lane ahead, please, keep to the right for automobiles, and it would be signed properly. And so the bus lane would be in the middle. Again, there's a westbound and eastbound bus lane, then there's a left turn, U-turn here, you can see that. And then there's the through lanes for autos. And again, at this particular location, we're able to keep it all within the curbs that are there. So that's really great. And then as we move along, again, the bus lanes would continue. It'd be the same situation on the opposite side. And again, we're able to keep all of that in the curb-to-curb distance that's there. And in this case, we're meeting criteria exactly. And you can see the 12s, 11s, 12s. So that's working out really good. And again, as we move on to 2nd Street, this is where our first station is. If you can imagine, a bus going eastbound would go through the intersection and would stop here. Patrons would get off and walk back westward towards the intersection and then cross the sidewalk with, push buttons and a very normal, standard kind of signaling situation. And then, of course, in the westbound direction, the same thing would happen. The bus would pull up, the light would turn red, and people could get on or off and, again, make a crossing at a very conventional sort of situation at this place. And just continuing moving along. Again, we're staying very close to the right-of-way. There may be some widening in through here to maintain the 8-foot sidewalks that are required by ADA, and we would do that. Again, the bus lanes, at this location there is no station, and we would be approaching the highway bridge. Again, we'd go over that, and again we fall within the curb-to-curb width of the bridge itself. Now at this location, as you can see, you've got a wide right-of-way for road and traffic, and then a narrow section. What would happen is the bus would pull up at this location, get a red light, and then just as the green light starts, we'd give a queue jump, what we want to call a queue jump to the bus. So the bus would get, like, say, 3-4 seconds head start to the rest of the traffic, and then the bus would go across the intersection and merge with regular traffic and become a mixed flow section here. And again, we're trying to limit right-of-way taking, so again, this makes a lot of sense for a short distance.
Does the bus driver control that teacher?
What's that?
Does the bus driver control that early?
It would be through the signal system itself. There's some video detection kinds of equipment that we would do that the system would know a bus is there, as opposed to cars. And then again, as the bus would approach 5th Street, it would pull into the center left turn lane, and again, it would get a green light, go around. And, you know, buses would be coming in the opposite direction as well. Okay? Again, mixed flow in this particular area because it's narrow right-of-way. And again, it would head north. Now, in this particular section, on the westbound direction, the bus lane would be there. Okay? So the bus would be making a left as well. But in the eastbound direction, the bus would pull into this through and right turn lane, make its turn, and then as it moves along, it would merge into the bus lane. As you can see, there's 2 lanes down at this location. And again, there would be signing and striping that would make it really clear. And so that takes us to, I believe, 6th Street. Let me just pull up another drawing. As you can imagine, these are rather long. Okay, so at 6th Street, the same kind of thing. The bus would pull up, and this would be a median station. So the bus would pull up, let passengers off. They would come back and go across the crosswalk. Again, the crosswalks would all have signal systems, just like conventional signals with push buttons and lights. Question?
Is that a mid-block?
Yeah, that would be a mid-block one.
That's mid-block, and I assume that you're going to have to do a property acquisition at that point?
In this particular case, you're absolutely right. And as you can see, we've tried to place these so that we're not affecting buildings. So in this case, to get the station in, there would be some right-of-way acquisition.
Let me add too that when you look at these, the camera that took these pictures is not always directly overhead, so it's sometimes at an angle. So sometimes where it looks like a line might be going over a sidewalk or even into a building, it's actually not.
Now, when you did the budget, particularly, did you include monies for right-of-way acquisition?
Yes, there's money in the overall budget for right-of-way.
Is there enough money?
We're going to, yeah.
Yeah, and Richard, you and I have been through that process together.
Yes, we have, on more than one occasion.
Well, Richard, I thought, Mark, you told us that there was $5 million allocated for right-of-way acquisition. Someone threw that figure out. Is that?
I think it's less than that.
You think it's less than $5 million?
Yeah.
All right. As Mark pointed out, you'll see that we've kind of noted, like in this location, we're going to be matching the existing building face. So we've been careful to do that. And then just moving along here, you can see here's a particular location that we narrowed up. Again, here's an existing building face here. Again, in this particular case, we have a 5-foot sidewalk at this point. Okay, that's something we would have to ask MTA for. They like a minimum of 6. But there are options here. We could maybe narrow the width of the bus lane a little bit to get the 6 foot here. But again, we're working really close with the right-of-way to make sure that we fit all of these things in. And again, here at this place, what we've got is you can see we've got the 10-foot lanes and the 11s. And again, these buildings are all being saved here. The previous design had taken out a little bit of this building, and we've modified the design in this case to not take any buildings at all. And we did that by using the minimum widths. Okay, as we move on past 7th, again, we're able to move back to the little bit wider lanes here. And again, some of the sidewalk we'll need a little bit of right-of-way out of some parking lots. in this area? I'm just going to keep sliding along. If anyone has a particular question, just, let me know, and we'll stop and look close. Again, as we approach 8th, we have another mid-block station, and again, we would need to take some right-of-way in this area for that. And again, we were careful to decide which side made the most sense. Here's buildings and things down here. We try to fit it in where it was more appropriate.
Steve?
Yeah.
Are you able to give us a 30-second oversimplified explanation of when one would choose a mid-block location to put a station as opposed to doing it at a signal or an intersection? Is it just the spacing of the stations?
At this point, it's the spacing of the station.
Okay. All right, thanks.
And as we move on, and later on, you'll see that we've had to move some stations around to better fit the neighborhood. Again, there's a lot of, as you can see, there's, because we're in an urban corridor, there's a lot of already existing buildings that we really need to work around, and a lot of geometry to make it all fit together. Again, we're just sliding along here. Again, the 2 bus lanes are now at the...
Can you go back just a little, Steve?
Sure.
McFerrin. No, that's pretty, is that an older aerial?
There's a building there.
Right here?
There's a building down there. It's called
Yeah.
Amplify?
We're doing an updated survey on some locations.
But you're showing a good deal of right-of-way being taken off.
Right. We may have to adjust that.
Well, yeah, if there's a building there.
I get it.
It can be taken out.
We will. How about, we have to.
It's not on Google.
Well, it does too. So you've got a building there, you're going to have to take a fair amount of right-of-way. Can you go back to your mid-block stop?
Sure.
Now, what if you had to move that mid-block stop to another area?
Okay.
And I think, Louis, you said you can move them. How do you move that after it's built and say, there's tremendous amount of economic development a block away that warrants a stop there? How do you move that stop to someplace else?
Oh, after it's been built?
Yes.
Well, it would take a lot of effort to do that,
It would
as
take a
you
lot
can
of
imagine.
effort.
Yeah.
Does effort include dollar signs?
Yep.
So it'd be extremely expensive.
Well, I don't know about it. I don't know about it.
right-of-way.
I don't know about extremely, but
Well, you'd have to buy
it would be
right-of-way.
expensive. Right.
And that, hopefully, as a result of the AMP, we are going to have a curve, which y'all say is going to be a curve when the criteria is economic development.
Right.
And if we have economic development, the price goes up on the property. And in fact, where you move the stop, it may be the same thing you're showing there with the Amplify building. There may be a building there where you can't acquire the right-of-way to move the stop. And I'm making that as a point that once it's built, you can't move it. You might be able to, but you're probably not going to be able to. And if you there's the great thing about Main Street, there is a lot of property that can be redeveloped. I mean, there's one area of this, unlike West End, which is developed. And I don't know how you do your economic survey on West End, but on East Nashville, you can do that. But if it does what it's supposed to do and spurs economic development, you're going to have more buildings like the Amplify. They're going to be built to the sidewalk, and you're not going to be able to take the right-of-way and move the stop, particularly if there's some high-density developments that go in that would necessitate a bus stop there. So, that's the problem I find with center lane stops, is once it's done, it's done.
But if the idea is to attract development to the stop, that's the purpose. The idea isn't to put the stop in thinking that you're going to attract development somewhere else and then have...
The development's going to go where they can find the property, not where the stop is.
But you're saying that if the development goes where the stop is, then that defeats
What if it
your ability
occurs
to move?
mid-block where the stop is not, or a block down the street, because that's the most available piece of property? I can assure you, developers are going to take the least path of resistance in buying the property to develop it, whether it's at a stop or not at a stop.
But if I have to walk 2 blocks instead of 1, I don't care.
You don't care.
I don't.
Well, I know you don't.
So who does?
Me?
Because
because I don't want to walk 2 blocks to get to the stop.
Well, you're just lazy, Rich.
No. No, I found...
You're not going to ride it anyhow.
Well, I may. Don't say that. I've ridden the bus many times. There are a lot, and this is something that really kind of upset me at one of the public hearings months and months ago. One of the pro-amp presenters made the comment that when they were talking about you may have to travel a ways to get to that stop. And he says, well, if you're not willing to walk to that stop, you're just lazy. There are a lot of people in this world that can't walk to that stop. They would if they could, but they can't. And that's an unfair comment to make, that just, hey, you may be lazy. It may be because I can't walk.
But you can.
But,
So if we want to talk about who can't and how that would affect them, I would love to have that discussion.
And a lot of people can't.
That's true.
Which is why we would still have the local service running with the more frequent stops. It's not going away. You still have the local option.
Tricia, you had a comment?
Well, basically, I mean, part of our discussion will get into who can and who can't walk to a certain stop. Watching this, I realize I'm going to have to kind of go over this one-on-one with somebody, because I'm really lost as to how much sidewalk we have. Do we have sidewalks wherever we need them? Are we going to be in a position like we were several years ago where we have a 100% accessible bus system, but the sidewalks are not, and people can't get to them? So
We're going to provide accessible sidewalks on the project.
And we'll make sure, Tricia, that you've got a chance to review all these things so that you're able to comment with those questions.
So we're again trying to get the 8 foot wherever we can, and a minimum of 6. And in some locations here there was 5. We need to get that approved through MTA or through Metro, but we're looking for the 8 foot wherever we can, and depending on the restrictions, it could go down to 6. Yeah, and it would need to be unobstructed above the sidewalk if we went lower.
Also, another challenging thing about sidewalk is maybe where AMP is going to the main street, it would be easy to have sidewalks in each way. However, the block on each side have to side street, because some people who lives on the side street may want to ride AMP, but from their house to come to the main street, there may not be any sidewalks. So that will make rather dangerous proposition to ride AMP. So we need to kind of look at that perspective as well.
Yeah, the project already has a number of streets designated for improvements like that through some landscape, hardscape improvements. So there are a number of streets already identified.
Yeah, there was a streetscape program. What we're trying to do is basically go 1 block off the route in each direction and make sure that there's a good walking surface 1 block in each direction. So we
that was included in the budget of $174.
It was, yes.
Other questions before Steve moves on?
All right. Again, we'll just slide along a little quick here. If you want me to slow down, let me know. Again, we're approaching 5 points here. And again, as we approach 10th, again, the same kind of queue jump would be provided, so that at 10th, the bus would get a queue jump, get ahead, and would drive over to the curb station, where they'd have a curb station on the eastbound direction and one on the westbound direction. And before we go any further, this is an updated alternative that we'll talk about in the next couple slides, but just wanted to just show you the general arrangement here. Up at Forest, the bus would turn right and go down Forest, and then make a left on 11th. And then up at Gartland, again, the bus would make a left and return back on the route.
So it's a mixed traffic?
Yes, in this particular section, it's mixed traffic. And another benefit of this is with the BRT buses that do go by, they can utilize these stations as well.
Is there any, this is a heavy school zone stuff?
Right.
Where like 3 or 4 crossing areas that
Right.
really kind of gum up traffic during the...
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Maybe we'll make a switch here and just kind of go into our conversations that we've had about 5 Points.
Just real quick, so there'll be 3 different kinds of buses at this part of the route, I assume. There'll be AMP buses, BRT, what we're calling BRT light buses,
Right.
and then local buses.
Right.
Okay.
And, again, there's some operational opportunities here to really connect a lot of people. Yes?
Does the next series of slides include the parking at East High School?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
All right.
Steve, can I?
Yeah.
What difference does the mixed traffic circumstance create for the predictability and the frequency of the BRT buses?
Well, again, as I think we've touched on before, with the center running, they've got their own lane. They don't have to compete with traffic. They can run at their own speed, and they just, with transit signal priority, they can move right along. So again, it's speed for center running because the buses are free to move. As you move into mixed traffic and curb running, you're again competing with the other traffic. I mean, if the other traffic slows down, then the bus will slow down. The bus will also have to compete with drivers that are turning into driveways. So there's a number of items that the buses have to compete with.
So when you hit those areas of mixed traffic, are they going to affect the predictability of a bus being at a stop at a given time? 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes?
Through the transit signal priority, we're going to try to keep that so that they don't get backed up terribly bad, let's put it that way. So we're going to try to just keep all of the traffic moving the best, optimize it the best we can so that it is predictable. Okay, if we just want to before we launch off into the East Nashville piece, I just want to provide a little background. We have met with community members over a matter of 3 meetings. The first meeting was more of a listening kind of meeting where we tried to understand what the issues were. The second meeting was a meeting where we presented some ideas, not firmly fixed. And then we had some questions out of that second meeting related mostly to schools. And between the second and third meeting, we met with the school principal, and we also met with the school architect just to get their feedback on some of the ideas that were generated. And then, of course, we had a third meeting to kind of wrap up all that we had learned and some additional modifications we'd made to some alternates. The key issues that we had heard from both at our community workshops as well as in this group were just the 11th Street, one-way or two-way. We also had some concern about parking on 11th Street itself. There was a desire to keep that. The signal at Gallatin Pike and 11th Street, there's some concern about that signal itself and how that may work. There was concern about a bus layover. As you can imagine, you're at the end of the line, so the bus has to stop, give the driver a chance for a rest break, also give the bus a little time to maybe catch up, slow down, speed up, so there'd be some time that some buses could wait there a little bit. And then, of course, school crossings were some issues that came up, as well as teacher parking, and then just some ideas about circulating the bus through the park and ride lot itself. That also came up. An item that did come up was a discussion about a circle, and the circle in East Nashville is not part of the scope, although one of our options, we tried to provide some gateway items that might help in a way for that. So just as a background, that's just some of the items that came up as we began talking about the 30% proposal and then an alternate. Okay, this drawing here demonstrates the 30% proposal. As you can see, there's a station here along the curbside. and a station, again, in the westbound along the curbside of Gallatin Pike. And again, here's Forest. And in this particular case, again, the bus would turn right down Forest and then make a left. Although in this case, 11th is one way in this particular block, this one block. And then near the library here would be used as the bus layover, as well as a dedicated bus lane, this piece here, so that cars would need to just, go straight up to Gallatin Road. They would not be allowed to make a left at this point. And Gartland, you could only make a right out at that location. A crosswalk would be provided at this location so that the bus could get out. And again, kids could, use this crosswalk to get across the street. And again, 2 lanes are maintained in each direction. There'd be a left turn lane here, and then a right turn lane here. And then this is the park and ride lot. The goal of the park and ride lot was to provide additional parking. There would be assigned spots for the teachers and assigned spots for those using the park and ride itself. Like I mentioned, we did have discussion about, well, why don't you just run the buses right through the park and ride lot? The school is not at all excited about that. There's a lot of, as you can imagine, there's a lot of kids everywhere, and they really don't want to mix the kids and the buses. So with that comment, we just didn't advance that any further. Yes, sir.
Is there any concern about mixing the kids with public parking that's pretty much unmonitored?
That has not come up as an issue. One issue that the school did want was direct visual line of sight to both of these stations. So that was one piece that they wanted to see.
Do you have to do a historic impact study on this?
Yeah, we do.
Yes.
I just want to point out a fact, though, is that this line here is a demarcation between historic property and some that is not, but we'll still have to do an assessment. So part of the design is to minimize the historic impact.
Are you acquiring that land from the school board, or are they just giving it to us?
They're letting us use it.
They're what?
They're letting us use it.
They're letting it.
Is there a minimum number of spots that you're trying to achieve the parking rides, parking spots?
Yeah, that one is 75.
75?
Yeah.
Will there also be facilities like bike parking, things like that around it? And also, there's a lot of parking in this area. I think MDHA has 2 lots, closer to 5 points where people could park, and then there's a pay lot over there. I mean, I could easily see a map at this location, or at least online, where people could, if this lot's filled up, there's plenty of other opportunities.
Sure.
And lots.
We certainly are interested in bike parking. We haven't fleshed out exactly what that's going to look like, but we're definitely interested in providing bike parking at the park and ride lots, clearly on the stations, and bike racks in the buses. But what they look like at the park and rides, we haven't finalized that yet.
But there will be bike lots.
Yes. Any questions on the 30% original plan? Okay, with that, we'll just move on. After we've talked to a number of people, we kind of have advanced another alternative. And in this case, 11th, again, the bus would go through the same routine. It would turn right onto Forest, left on 11th, and then again a U-turn back around Gallatin Pike. But in this particular case, again, this is 2-way, so that we're allowing cars to traverse that in both directions, and that was certainly of interest to the business community. They felt that it was challenging to make that particular block 1-way when the rest of it's 2-way, trying to feed back into the rest of 5 Points. So that was a piece that we tried to look at closely and see what else we could do. And as you can see, the bus now does not stop by the library here for for the layover. What we've done is we've allowed the bus to, again, make its U-turn and lay over right here next to the park and ride lot. But in doing that, we would need to provide a restroom which we've got identified here. So rather than laying over here in this particular area, we're going to lay over right here by the park and ride lot. And again, this isn't like a massive bunch of buses laying over. It's only 5-10 minutes, enough for the driver to hit the rest stop and maybe catch up a little time, or, you know, a couple of minutes. So it's not like, you know, some people envision lots of buses. It's not that. It's only a couple at the most. Other changes, again, you can see that we've kept the parking in this location and along here. And then what we've tried to do is, if there were chances for us to create some green space out of this, to maybe help create more of a gateway kind of a thing, we tried to do that. And to help this intersection work out here, again, on Gartland, you would be able to go left or right at this location. So you could come out and turn right, or you would go left. And you can see the bus, again, would just turn left and go back down. The cars would merge with this lane. It would not be a dedicated bus lane here. But the green would show areas of landscaping that we would put in as part of the project. And then the median here, it provides a couple different benefits, both to the project as well as to the school. What we're trying to do is guide people that are crossing to come to the crosswalk. So with a raised median, though, you know, people can still jump over a median. This would certainly guide people to cross at this location. And the 30% plan, you were crossing back here. We thought that this would bring you closer to the library, closer to the downtown, so you wouldn't have to make a second crossing. And then another issue that the school did not want this to be they only wanted it to be a right out. They thought that the traffic here was just too confusing with the school and the pedestrians, so we blocked that off with the median as well.
Steve?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't remember the street name, the street south of Gartland.
This one
there
here?
At 11th, is it?
That's Forest.
Thank you. Yeah.
Forest.
And so there, I'm sorry, did you say, will there be a stoplight now at 11th and Forest? Or?
No, it would again be just sign controlled.
That's it's a four-way? No, it's not a four-way. It's not a four-way now.
Yeah, it's a two-way now, so I guess at least it would have to be a four-way.
Yeah.
So right now, we're anticipating it being signed. I mean, if there was enough traffic to make it signalized, then we would make it signalized.
It's a surprisingly difficult intersection to get through as a two-way, so I think a four-way at least.
Yeah, that's a good thought. We could do that easily.
And you all were talking about, you know, making improvements at block in. I think it's really important then for people, I'm thinking of tourists that haven't been to the Five Points area and are wondering when they've arrived at Five Points. You know, and so when they get to these stations, then will there be pedestrian and bike improvements then to lead you into the Five Points area? Because I know Clearwater, or Clearview, excuse me, is a little, you know, it's mostly cars. There's a really narrow sidewalk on either side, and then coming up, you can't really see 10th there, but it's a very wide street. There's no street trees. You know, there is a sidewalk on either side. But will there be things like street trees then that'll be added?
Yeah.
To improve
Yes.
that? Okay.
And we also have a like a wayfinding program, so there'll also be some wayfinding signage that would help guide people to, you know, different venues in the area.
Okay, one more comment though. Well, I'm
Sure.
thinking of it, I think it's great that the way the system is, how you've been able to, you know, work with the neighbors on this. And then I see as, you know, I think a lot of East Nashville people would agree that they want to eventually see this continue on down and make BRT light, you know, permanent, even BRT is further in future years. Is that a big transition then? You could likely then narrow back into, if you wanted dedicated lanes, to continue back up to Gallatin, or can you talk a little bit about the regional approach for that?
I think you could always extend a system once it's there. You know, it's just, again, working out the geometry and kind of going through the, you know, the nuts and bolts of it. But, you know, clearly there's already a BRT light there, so that, you know, that'll just kind of continue. These two things will work pretty well together, I think. Does that help?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
Not sure if I answered your question.
Thinking about this as a, you know,
Yeah.
how it's going to tie in.
And that's partly why we like the at this particular location, the curbside makes a lot of sense, because then the BRT lights can hit those, and, people can move between the BRT light and the BRT, or however they want to do that.
Steve,
Yeah.
if you've already answered this, I apologize, but the BRT light that runs from Rivergate will continue to operate?
Yes.
Or will it operate all the way to Music City Central, or will people be getting off at 5?
It'll operate all the way in. I mean, it would
will.
make the most sense, yeah.
And it operates with curbside?
Right. It's a curbside operation.
And so, in determining to put dedicated lanes on the 1.4
Right.
mile that's did you determine that because of a need to gain time in transit, or how did you determine that instead of just keeping this rather small area curbside?
Well, it's like the whole system. I mean, the BRT, let's say BRT heavy, is the whole system. So you're trying to speed up the whole system from 5 Points all the way to West End. And so the center is for, obviously a speed kind of thing to keep it moving quickly.
So it is speed on 1.4 mile distance.
Where it can fit in.
But that has 2 stations in that 1.4.
Right.
Right. Okay.
Other questions? Yeah.
One, and I guess it's for the entire route. Are we going to automatically include like audible pedestrian signals at the major crossings and things like that? Or is that going to have to fall under the regular route of request for public accommodation from Public Works?
I believe we're intending to have, either push button, vibratory, audible. We can put all of those at the BRT stations themselves. And I would envision that's exactly what we're going to do. No other comments? We'll keep chugging along. For this particular situation, as the design team, we're kind of recommending this and preferring this as an alternative. I don't know if today's a day to
So what I would
do
love
more
to
with
do
that,
is to get as much comment, question for Steve and Mark for the team in terms of looking at this section. I mean, they've kind of laid it out to us in detail. It was sent out to everybody, and I just wanted to make sure if there are any questions that we get those questions answered, addressed at this point.
I did have one question. I know that the school was considering teacher parking, but that's a high school. Is there any consideration for student parking?
I know that they're looking at rearranging their parking in general. They have other places that they can park.
Okay.
They didn't let me know what that would be, but they are looking for other, they are reevaluating their own parking.
There's parking in the back.
But isn't East High looking at rebuilding the football stadium that was taken away from them in the back?
Yeah, we met with school, Richard. I mean, they've weighed in on this. So.
Okay.
I mean, they're satisfied with this plan from the school's perspective.
The Alumni Association for East High School is going through a tremendous fundraising effort to try to rebuild the stadium that is no longer there, which the city tore down. And it's a historic football stadium. I've never understood how they get around with that. But I just want to make sure that they're going to have room to rebuild the stadium if the Alumni Association can raise the money for us to rebuild the football stadium that we don't have anymore. And I just want to make sure that we have that room, that there's plenty of parking that can go with that football stadium should they get it back. And if the fans wanted to park in the parking lot for the park and ride, could they park there for the games? I guess it belongs to the city or to the school board. They can park anywhere they want to. Okay.
You can ride the amp, too.
Yeah. You can ride the amp as well.
Other questions? Yes, Lynn.
for traffic that is coming up Garland, turning right, is that, I love green space, but is that green space being that wide going to be a kind of a choke point to keep traffic that's turning right from blending in, merging in with the other traffic as easily as it might if there were more of a
Maybe a
turn
lane up through there?
Something like that. I don't know. I'm just trying to anticipate that
We could consider that.
it may be something that might create traffic that would be afternoons, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, we could consider like a rate-only lane through there if traffic warrants that. We're just beginning the traffic analysis here to see how that's going to operate. We believe preliminary analysis shows that it's going to work fine.
Okay.
But if we finalize it, we can look at like right turn lanes and things to maybe make it move better or those kind of things. But we could definitely consider that.
This is also the kind of thing we rely on Public Works for, is that, when we're getting up into that portion on the basis of your question, we're kind of getting away from actually what we're doing. And so we meet with Public Works on this and get a lot of their input, and ultimately we'll probably end up doing what they advise us to do. So, but that's the kind of thing that's on the table.
All right, and there was a term that I'd like, maybe everybody else knows what it means, but environmental justice. Can you elaborate on that, Steve?
Environmental justice is determining how the project may impact minority populations. And it's another section of the EA document itself.
Oh, okay.
I mean, you don't want to disproportionately harm various populations in the city with a project.
Okay.
So, and often a project like this, benefits everyone that's using it.
All right, but
Does that answer
does it take into account harm to a minority group that is not using it, but is impacted negatively by it?
Yeah. I think it compares it to the no build, but I'd have to check that question particular. We could get back with you on it.
A larger question, too, is as a community, are we providing service equally so that all the schools don't end up in one neighborhood or all the transit doesn't end up in one neighborhood? You try to disperse it equally across the community. That's another aspect that they look at it.
Okay.
Next question.
And I know I'm getting off the specifics of this, but wanted to go back to the state funding, the request by the FTA that they were looking for state and local funding. And the comment was made that the feds didn't care whether it came from the state or the city. Is that correct? They don't care?
Yeah, they lump that all as local funding. They want a local match. Generally, that's state or city. But as far as defining that pot, it's not necessary for either or, but the local match has to be provided.
And it seems like I heard somewhere, too, that they were looking for broad community support. And the fact that the state has, at least at this point, been reluctant to give any financial support indicates lack of community support. Would that not be construed by the FTA that there's a lack of, at least in one area, of community support?
I mean, what they're going to look, we made our proposal, and in that proposal we had both state, as part of the local financial commitment, we had state and local. And so that's what they expect us to do, and that's still our intent.
Okay.
What percentage of your proposal was local support financial?
Do you remember what?
Yeah, I think the total local is 94 million. That's state and
State and?
local together, or state and city together.
But
Again,
hypothetical-
local could be, various funding sources, but local means, at the grassroots level as opposed to federal money.
Does that include council awards as well as taxes?
It could come by any kind of means,
Well,
local.
What was the question?
What way could that be funded?
It would be in the capital budget.
Okay.
So we've had I think, a really good presentation of at least the detail of what's out there. I want to make sure that we've answered any questions that anybody might have about this route. Richard?
Yeah, I want to go back to the parking at LP Field. Obviously, rather than going, straight down Main Street, across the bridge, and right into Music City Center, you go to LP Field, and I assume that's because there's available parking there. Presently, we have a shuttle service, in fact, several shuttle services that run out of LP Field. And because we've used it as an economic incentive to try to attract businesses back to the CBD, and it's been very successful. How do you envision the AMP working with those shuttles and parking rights for the people that are there presently and the people that would park for the AMP?
Well, clearly there's a number of operational issues that still need to be worked through with MTA, including how the local buses will work, how does that mesh with the various shuttles, not only there, but even in the downtown area. I mean, that still has to be worked out yet.
So there hasn't been any kind of discussion with the businesses that have a preponderance of parking over there about how it's going to work? Is there going to be any change as to how it works, or were they just going to be able to continue to utilize the existing shuttle systems? Or did AMP and their ridership increases show that they were going to be shuttling the people that are presently being shuttled to get their number?
Richard, we haven't done that much work on that yet. I think in simple terms, we just see it as another choice. Obviously there's a lot of parking over there. There's 7,000 spaces. So I think there can be more than one option on how you use that lot and how people travel into downtown or other places. But we haven't done a whole lot of work on that yet.
So I know that we all come at this from a variety of different backgrounds as we are on this committee. We've got a route that's laid out between the river and 5 Points. Are there any other questions? I don't think we need to go through and take a vote, but I would be interested in getting a consensus feel for folks about the route as it is laid out. Any kind of thoughts or comments on people's perspective of what's been presented?
I think I just have a quick clarification. So, once you do more refinement, you're going to show where, bike parking's going to be, and then you're coordinating with Public Works then, I guess, on the streetscape plan, pull you into 5 Points. So that's part of the overall improvement. Because, it's not just getting people to this stop, it's also connecting in. And then third is the 56 that runs down the BRT light. So will that stop then at these stations and then continue into the route as it goes on to downtown?
I think there's options that could happen. I know that, correct me if I'm wrong, but MTA is looking at trying to get left and right side bus doors on their buses. So there's some real operational opportunities that, again, they aren't fully worked out at this point. But I would think that there's opportunities for that.
Okay.
And Diane, you had mentioned, there are only 2 stations here. One can agree or disagree with center access, I think for those folks who like, or 3 seconds, for those folks who like center access, eventually I would think that it would be advantageous to take BRT Light and make it an AMP, essentially, meaning run the AMP all the way out to Hendersonville or to Gallatin, because people who believe in that system think it's more efficient, quicker, has more ridership, et cetera. But there's a limit on federal money and what locally we can swallow. And so it would be a transition, but during a transition, there'll be a BRT Light and an AMP if all this happens. Eventually, there might not be a BRT Light. There might just be an AMP that goes all the way out.
Or there could be a BRT Light that comes all the way in.
There could. That's why I said for those people who believe the theory.
But Louis, I assume
which some do, some don't.
I assumed that the only reason to put dedicated lanes on 1.4 miles, in which, I mean, even though Steve said speed was the factor, 1.4 miles, you know, by the time you get up to speed, you're getting ready to stop at a station again. So I assumed, Louis, that the reason they're going ahead and planning it is with the hope that ridership and the less deterioration of the neighborhood will in fact cause it eventually to become. I assume that.
Sure.
Whether that happens or not, I think.
Sure, that's a question. And again, it's a theory of whether you believe this is a good idea or not. But I think Ralph asked the question earlier, about regionalism versus, I mean, theoretically, this is a spike. This is just a start. And if one believes that this is the way to go, one would hope that later on it'll go in a number of directions. There'll be one on Charlotte. It'll go to Gallatin. There'll be something going to Murfreesboro, et cetera. But obviously, we don't have the resources to make that happen right now.
But Louis, that goes back to the point originally that Ralph brought it up and Mark answered it. I'm a big believer in rapid transit or mass transit or whatever you want to call it today. But I believe, too, that it has to be part of an overall regional plan. And the question was asked, is this part of an overall regional plan? And the answer was no. And can you talk about spending $175 million for public transportation when you don't even know how it relates to the balance of transportation throughout the region? And that's been my argument? Yes.
Actually, my question was whether the FTA evaluated the role of this project in a regional plan. And the answer I think I got is it is part of the discussion, but it isn't a part of formal paperwork.
It wasn't part of the application.
Submission.
If I
regional plan, if you go to the MPO.
Yeah, I've seen it. I've studied it. Don't worry.
But if I could, Bert, could I continue that discussion? Look, if you're asking for an observation with regards to today's presentation, it seems to me that you've connected a lot with the neighborhood on this terminal point, and that's or at least this turnaround, and that's a really good feature. The fact that there's been so much collaboration in the discussion, you've made alterations according to the neighborhood specifications, et cetera. In viewing the overview of the whole route, seeing those lane widths labeled, those station locations, et cetera, hearing the answers to the questions, it seems like for this stage of the plan and development, you're engaging a variety of people and you are studying the physical limitations and the physical opportunity that exists there. So, for me, this has been a very illuminating discussion, reinforced by the fact that a broader group of people have been engaged in the discussion.
What I would like to see is this plan uploaded to MTS site so more people will have a chance to take a look at it and comment. I think compared to original plan and current alternative layout, to me, looks much, much better and reflects lots of voice from the neighborhood. I think it became, great improvement. but I would like to see more people comment on that particular change. And so you may need, work on more depending on the comment you receive. So going forward, I would like to see this one kind of uploaded, and then as we move forward, each section by section, upload it as much as possible with detail, with clear picture, so people have more understanding and chance to comment.
Is that possible, Steve?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We can get this information up on the MTA's website.
Other questions or thoughts? I mean, I think what I'm trying to get to is that I know that there are issues between whether it ought to be center run-in or not, and I'm not sure that we're going to be able to solve that today, but in general, are there any specific questions about the route itself that aren't kind of to the existence of the AMP itself? Any particular comments that are there? If not, I think we will get it out on the website, make sure that it's publicly there, that people have a chance to comment on it. And if there's not any other comments, Steve will move to the other two pieces which are really more informational, I guess, than this specific one, which is getting a sense of the route itself.
Yeah, okay. The next section is about just station design and ADA requirements that we're going to be designing to. In this particular slide, you can see on the left side is the AMP rendering. On the right side is a picture of a operating BRT level boarding center platform. And we're going to be designing the platforms to be level boarding, and as you can see on the right, it's very convenient for people to go on and off the bus itself. What we found is people in wheelchairs also get on and off very quickly on the buses themselves because, again, they're level boarding. Makes the whole operation move real smoothly. The next piece is you'll see that at a intersection, this kind of shows that you would have standard signal equipment as well as push buttons both on the curbside and on the station platform itself. And as discussed earlier, these push buttons can be vibratory and audible so that all people can use those easily. At each break where there's between the sidewalk and the roadway, there'd again be the truncated domes to provide that texture, to provide that warning to those crossing the street as well. On the station itself, there'd be a ramp up from the sidewalk up to the platform level, which is about 14 inches. Again, that would be at a rate like 2%, so that you wouldn't need any handrails or anything like that. We'd also be looking at putting in some bollards to provide additional safety for people that would be out in the middle of traffic. Well, not the middle, but out in the center platform. And another option that we've looked at in other locations is to actually provide some fencing to help just guide people so that people aren't cutting across the street as much. So again, we would be looking at that, and as these details were to develop, we would certainly present them to this group here. But clearly, this system has worked well in other locations, and we're hoping to advance the same kind of successes here. As far as amenities on the platform itself, we would provide sufficient space so that pedestrians as well as those in wheelchairs could easily get around. Again, the platforms would be provided with the warning strips next to the edge so that people could identify where that is, where they are. There'd also be, you can see that there's like a color difference so that people that have visual impairments could also tell the difference. So we would be providing all of those kinds of things. Just a point of note, you see this colored panel? I mean, everything on these platforms have a purpose. This panel actually shows a place for the bus drivers to stop so that all the doors line up with the station so that nothing blocks people getting on and off. So again, it's a whole system of things that we need to work out. On the left here, on this slide, this shows a sketch of the AMP curbside station, and on the right shows a curbside station that's in place. What you want to note is that the sidewalks ramp up to the station so that there's no change at all that's noticeable to the pedestrians, and that pedestrians will just walk right through the station itself, so that there would be, again, no obstructions. And again, it would meet the 14-inch clearance at the curbside. Just to touch on a couple of the criteria that are specific to Metro, again, they want an 8-foot sidewalk width with a 3-foot concrete utility strip, a 5-foot concrete walkway. It could also be a 3-foot landscape strip if you'd like. They have a minimum 6-foot concrete walkway, but there would be no obstructions above the surface of the sidewalk to make that work. So we're going to be complying with that. The platform itself, the running slope is preferred at 2%. Again, that's the slope of the road itself, with a maximum of 3%. And you need to note that because Nashville is quite hilly. So in every place where there's a station, we need to make sure the running slope meets the ADA criteria that we have here. Any questions or comments? Okay. And with that, we've ended up moving a couple of stations around a little bit. We've met with Vanderbilt 2 times. They really didn't like the station in front of their main entrance, and so we, began dialogue with them to see what would work out better. And at 23rd, this is a high pedestrian crossing area, so it really made a lot of sense to begin to move the platform down to that area. It was back over here. Was the original location. And again, to make this work out, we've examined where historic walls are. Again, to the west, there's some historic walls that we would want to keep. And in this location, there's some metal fencing and some trees that they're open to changing that a bit to get the station in. And so what we've got, again, is we've got the through lanes, the bus lane. Again, the station slid down closer to 23rd Street. And again, in these locations, we would match building faces. And again, Vanderbilt has been open to this option. So again, we've made some changes to the 30% plans. Another location is at 12th. In the 30% design, the station was going to be up on the bridge itself. The bridge is not structurally sufficient, at least to carry the cars and the buses and the loading criteria for the stations. So there was
the interstate?
Yeah. The railroad tracks.
Oh.
Over there, yeah. And so the idea was maybe we need to move that off the bridge. I mean, it's adequate for what's going on now, but to add all these other things would be, more cost to update the bridge itself. And it would be just good in long-term maintenance not to have a station tied to a bridge. I think it's just, practical design. So we've looked at moving the bridge moving the station just off the bridge, like in this location. We looked at putting a station right here on the east side of 12th, and then we looked at putting one on the west side of 12th. And what we found is that we really want to keep this left turn open going into the gulch. And to do that and to fit a station with the various buildings and parking areas in this area, a station in this location on the west side of 12th works the best. This keeps the traffic flowing for the gulch, and it also allows the traffic to move through the area as well, while, again, matching buildings. And yeah.
Sorry. I see that going eastbound, there's a through lane and a through and right turn combined lane.
Yes.
From just a design perspective, what I think when I look at that is, why not acquire a little right of way and add a right turn lane?
Well, we looked at that.
Is that easy, hard?
Well, it's not easy.
Okay.
This is, McDonald's right here. And they've recently redid a lot of that. And I think if we were to take out the parking here, that would really kind of change their operation significantly. So we didn't think that was such a great idea, so we're not pursuing that. Internally, we saw that would really change that operation a lot. So we're staying off of that. A couple other items that we looked at is the Broadway station. This particular slide shows what you call a profile, so it's sort of like a side view of the road where the Broadway station is located. It's hard to imagine, but let's just kind of talk through it. If you're standing there on Broadway, it goes uphill. This is the uphill part. So the existing road is this sort of dotted line here. To get a station at that location and have the 2%, you'd have to make a cut in the road, a depression in the middle of the road to make that work. Okay? Just bear with me. No judgment yet. And if you look at it in cross-section, you can imagine, over here's the Bridgestone Arena, over here's the convention center, and you'd have to build something like this to make that work, to meet the ADA criteria. So even though it's technically something you could do, we're thinking it's not really practical for that location. There's a lot of people that move back and forth. So
Practically, he says it's practically possible,
we could put people on the
building
moon,
the
right?
Panama Canal.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, we're not recommending this, okay?
That wouldn't, but.
Okay. But again, what we've done is we're going.
$5 million.
Yeah, we're going through the 30% design and really kind of scrubbing this thing to make sure it's practical and reasonable. And this is one that we think that another choice is needed. And so we're kind of recommending that an alternate route may be more appropriate than trying to keep a station right there at Bridgestone Arena. Okay? And it's because it's on an 8% slope. Okay? That hill coming up out of, the lower downtown is like on 8%, and we need to have 3 or 2. So it really isn't feasible, and you really don't want to dig into that road right in front of the Bridgestone Arena. It's just not really practical. So we're recommending an alternate route.
So what if you did it on the side? You couldn't do it on a side?
Well, again, I think you're back to the 8% slope. Doesn't meet criteria.
Sidewalks.
Yeah, are too steep, really too steep for a platform.
That's really too bad.
Another location is on Fifth Avenue. Again, in this particular location, it's again, I think those are at 5 or 6% slopes. And we would recommend moving those stations either up to between Church and Charlotte, or again, a concept of maybe an alternate location. And it's also very congested. Fifth Avenue has a lot of trucks that load and unload. It'd be hard to have multiple locations, cars. So we either need to locate those stations up between Church and Charlotte, or come up with an alternate route. So these are just some other issues that we're working with.
This is 2 really good examples of how ADA drives design. So we end up making, practical design decisions based on, being able to provide an ADA compliant station, which is a primary goal.
Again, we're just evaluating alternate routes. Okay, this is the end of the ADA station location section. Again, we presented some criteria. We presented some. This is the end of the ADA and station location section. Again, we presented some stations that are moving, and how we arrived at those choices. And we also talked about some criteria. Are there any comments you may have?
Why don't we go to the mid-block, because we've got 5 minutes to wrap up.
All right. Switching now to the mid-block stations themselves, this is a rendering of a similar mid-block station used on another project. What we want to point out, though, is just these traffic signals for the crosswalks. These will use traffic signals that everyone's used to seeing, and also the crosswalks themselves will be striped and signed as conventional crosswalks would be. And TDOT asked us to actually investigate the safety of mid-block crosswalks, and so we did that. And what we found is shown in this chart here. For a 30-mile-an-hour road, where there are signals used at mid-block crossings, motorists yield to those almost 100% of the time. But using other kinds of systems like flashers and signs and beacons and those sorts of things, people don't stop for those as much. And it's because they're used to those, they're used to traffic signals, and they also can be fined. So I think people are used to that. And so we're going to use that in our design as well. And again, the same kind of thing works for 4-lane roads. Again, the use of signals, we find that motorists yield almost 100% of the time for those. So we feel that that is the safest way to go for these mid-block stations, and it's certainly safer than other kinds of signing for those. What I do want to point out is because we moved a number of stations, the number of mid-block stations have reduced. We have 3 in East Nashville, and now there's only 2 in West Nashville. So the number of those have gone down. Most of them are becoming just your center platform right at a conventional crosswalk. Any comments regarding safety of mid-block?
Safety came up several times towards the end of the legislative session. We think to a large degree these mid-block stations were largely misunderstood, so we hope this clears up some of that. I also want to say that our team, certainly MTA, is going to build the safest project that we can, and that our Public Works Department, which has to approve the project, and TDOT also feels the same way. So I think safety is going to be built into it at every step. It's just fundamental.
So, any other questions? I might close because we're getting to our 2 o'clock. We'll get the minutes checked, get those back out to everybody to seek to get those approved. We'll get the minutes out again for you. We will have the deck that went for the May 21st community meetings out to folks so that they get it. We will have our review for next week out again a week in advance. My thought is that next week we might take the first piece of our meeting and actually ride the route so that, you know, all of us come with different neighborhood perspectives, you know, downtown, east, west, and I think it might be really good to kind of look at this all as, you know, get a sense of the whole thing that's out there. So my objective next week, or next month, is to take a ride and also to be able to dive in again with presentation from Mark and Steve. Any questions that anybody's got?
Will it be covered from basically now LP Field or the river to?
We'll actually go all the way out, and I think start at east and go.
No, I mean our discussion.
Oh, this discussion, yes. We would start at the river and kind of keep going. Okay. But if there are issues that are out there that we need to be grabbing, just let us know. I think the thought is, let's have these sections, let's talk about them for issues that we can get, you know, all the comments out, let's get that, and then move on to the next piece kind of as we go. Yes, sir.
For our ride of the route,
Have you already taken delivery on one of these buses?
We're going
Yes?
to use one of the 60-foot BRT lane buses.
Okay. And they've got the doors on both sides?
I believe so.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Cool.
Any other questions? It's yes, Drake.
Could Steve give us easy-to-read, paper projected maps so that we go through a section, we can see what you told us about today?
Sure. Who wants, you would like a paper copy?
I would, because I'm not going to take a handheld and do all that. And what we received electronically didn't reproduce legibly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Is that for the ride or for just?
Just for the ride.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
For the ride.
Yeah. Okay. Y'all, thank you. I want to honor your time, 2 hours in and out, and thank you very, very much for a productive meeting today. We'll meet back here.